doing what they must and massively reducing immigration, governments have done the opposite, and in doing so have proven that the wishes and demands of the people can and will be steamrolled in pursuit of a morally repugnant and twisted mass immigration agenda.
Led by Prime Minister.
In recent months, the United Kingdom has found itself at the epicenter of a heated debate over its immigration policies, particularly under the newly elected Labour government led by Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The controversy has been exacerbated by the government's decision to proceed with a deportation flight and the cancellation of visas for Muslims, sparking widespread condemnation both domestically and internationally. The Labour Party's victory in the recent elections marked a significant political shift from the previous Conservative administration, which had been under intense scrutiny for its handling of immigration issues. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's government, elected on a platform promising to address social inequalities and uphold human rights, now faces its first major challenge with the implementation of controversial immigration policies.
Doors opening. I'm going to stop you there. Here comes Rishi Sunak.
Good morning. I will shortly be seeing His Majesty the King to offer my resignation as Prime Minister. To the country, I would like to say first and foremost, I am sorry. I have given this job my all, but you have sent a clear signal that the government of the United Kingdom must change, and yours is the only judgment that matters. I have heard your anger, your disappointment, and I take responsibility for this loss. To all the Conservative candidates and campaigners who worked tirelessly but without success, I am sorry that we could not deliver what your efforts deserved. It pains me to think how many good colleagues who contributed so much to their communities and our country will now no longer sit in the House of Commons. I thank them for their hard work and their service. Following this result, I will step down as party leader, not immediately, but once the formal arrangements for selecting my successor are in place. It is important that after 14 years in government, the Conservative Party rebuilds, but also that it takes up its crucial role in opposition professionally and effectively. When I first stood here as your Prime Minister, I told you the most important task I had was to return stability to our economy. Inflation is back to target, mortgage rates are falling, and growth has returned. We have enhanced our standing in the world, rebuilding relations with allies, leading global efforts to support Ukraine, and becoming the home of a new generation of transformative technologies. And our United Kingdom is stronger too, with the Windsor Framework, devolution restored in Northern Ireland, and our union strengthened. I'm proud of those achievements. I believe this country is safer, stronger, and more secure than it was 20 months ago. And it is more prosperous, fairer, and resilient than it was in 2010. Whilst he has been my political opponent, Sir Keir Starmer will shortly become our Prime Minister. In this job, his successes will be all our successors, and I wish him and his family well. Whatever our disagreements in this campaign, he is a decent, public-spirited man who I respect. He and his family deserve the very best of our understanding as they make the huge transition to their new lives behind this door, and as he grapples with this most demanding of jobs in an increasingly unstable world. I'd like to thank my colleagues, my cabinet, the civil service, especially.
At the heart of the current controversy is the UK's decision to enforce a deportation flight policy aimed at asylum seekers, particularly those who have crossed the English Channel from France. Under this policy, individuals deemed to have entered the UK illegally are to be deported to Rwanda, an East African nation, and barred from re-entering the UK. This move has been criticised as draconian and inhumane by human rights organisations and advocacy groups who argue that it violates international refugee law and undermines the UK's obligations to protect vulnerable populations. The decision to cancel visas specifically for Muslims has also ignited fierce debate within the UK and beyond. Critics contend that targeting individuals based on their religious affiliation constitutes discrimination and runs counter to principles of religious freedom and equality under the law. The Labour government's justification for this policy remains contentious, with proponents arguing it is necessary to strengthen national security and control immigration flows, while opponents decry it as discriminatory and unjust.
Actually, here in Downing Street, the team at Chequers, my staff, CCHQ, but most of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to my wife Akshata and our beautiful daughters. I can never thank them enough for the sacrifices they have made so that I might serve our country. One of the most remarkable things about Britain is just how unremarkable it is that 2 generations after my grandparents came here with little, I could become Prime Minister, and that I could watch my 2 young daughters light Diwali candles on the steps in Downing Street. We must hold true to that idea of who we are, that vision of kindness, decency, and tolerance that has always been the British way. This is a difficult day, at the end of a number of difficult days. But I leave this job honoured to have been your Prime Minister. This is the best country in the world, and it is thanks entirely to you, the British people, the true source of all our achievements, our strengths, and our greatness. Thank you.
Joining his wife, Akshata, Rishi Sunak leaving Downing Street as Prime Minister for the final time after 20 months in office. In that speech, he began with a furrowed brow and a glint in his eye with an apology to the country, an apology to his party, apology to his colleagues who had lost their seats. But he went on to highlight some of the achievements he believes he had made in his time here, settling the country's economy, bringing back some stability after the political and economic explosion of his predecessor, Liz Truss. He said he would stay as Conservative leader until the formal arrangements to make his successor are in place. Now, those arrangements do not yet exist, so it is unclear for how long he will actually remain Conservative leader, but he is not driving away today, never to have any role at the top of his party again. So he said once formal arrangements are in place, he will step down as the Conservative Party leader. But you can see him entering Whitehall there, and you can probably also hear some of the boos and jeers as the cars make their way off to Buckingham Palace.
The backdrop to these contentious policies lies in a complex web of global and domestic factors. The UK, like many European countries, has grappled with waves of migration driven by conflicts in the Middle East, Africa and Asia, as well as economic disparities that push individuals to seek better opportunities abroad. These factors have placed significant strain on the UK's resources and infrastructure, leading to public discontent and political pressure to tighten immigration controls.
And there is Sir Keir Starmer, who will become Britain's 58th Prime Minister. He's speaking in central London. He's the only 5th Labour Prime Minister ever to win a general election. A man who often presents a serious demeanour in public, but look at that grin from ear to ear as supporters behind him cheer. The Union flag and the saltire, look, they are being flown behind him as Labour has racked up seats in Scotland. Let's listen in to the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
We did it! You campaigned for it, you fought for it, you voted for it, and now it has arrived. Change begins now. And it feels good, I have to be honest. 4.5 years of work changing the party. This is what it is for. A changed Labour Party, ready to serve our country, ready to restore Britain to the service of working people. And across our country, people will be waking up to the news, relieved that a weight has been lifted, a burden finally removed from the shoulders of this great nation. And now we can look forward again, walk into the morning, the sunlight of hope, pale at first, but getting stronger through the day, shining once again on a country with the opportunity after 14 years to get its future back. And I want to thank each and every one of you here for campaigning so hard for change. And not just in this campaign either. Also for these 4.5 years changing our party. The Labour movement is always everything's achieved, past and future, down to the efforts of its people. So thank you truly. You have changed our country.
From a historical perspective, immigration has long been a divisive issue in British politics, reflecting deep-seated anxieties about national identity, cultural integration and economic stability. Successive governments have struggled to strike a balance between welcoming refugees and migrants in need of protection while addressing concerns about the impact of immigration on public services, job markets and social cohesion. The Labour government's approach to immigration policy under Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been framed as a departure from the previous administration's more restrictive stance. However, the implementation of deportation flights and visa cancellations has drawn sharp criticism from civil society, opposition parties and international observers who view these measures as regressive and harmful to the UK's reputation as a champion of human rights. In response to mounting criticism, Prime Minister Keir Starmer and his cabinet have defended their policies as necessary measures to restore order and integrity to the UK's immigration system. They argue that deportation flights are a deterrent against illegal crossings and criminal activities facilitated by human trafficking networks. Additionally, they assert that visa cancellations are part of broader efforts to enhance national security and ensure that immigration policies are fair and equitable for all communities.
But a mandate like this comes with a great responsibility. Our task is nothing less than renewing the ideas that hold this country together. National renewal. Whoever you are, wherever you started in life, if you work hard, if you play by the rules, this country should give you a fair chance to get on. It should always respect your contribution, and we have to restore that. And alongside that, we have to return politics to public service. Show that politics can be a force for good. Make no mistake, that is the great test of politics in this era. The fight for trust is the battle that defines our age. It is why we've campaigned so hard on demonstrating we are fit for public service. Service is the precondition for hope. Respect, the bond that can unite a country. Together, the values of this changed Labour Party are the guiding principle for a new government. Country first, party second. That is the responsibility of this mandate. You know, 14 years ago, we were told that we're all in it together. I say to the British people today, Imagine what we can do if that were actually true. So, by all means, enjoy this moment. Nobody can say you haven't waited patiently. Enjoy the feeling of waking up on a morning like this, with the emotion that you do see the country through the same eyes. Hold on to it, because it is what unity is made from. But use it to show to the rest of the country, as we must, that this party has changed, that we will serve them faithfully, govern for every single person in this country.
Despite these justifications, calls for a more compassionate and humane approach to immigration continue to resonate across the UK. Civil society organisations, religious leaders and grassroots activists have mobilised to challenge what they perceive as discriminatory practices and advocate for policies that uphold human rights and uphold the UK's obligations under international law. The debate over immigration policy in the UK is also intertwined with broader discussions about social justice, racial equality, and the role of government in protecting vulnerable populations. Critics argue that policies targeting Muslims and other marginalised communities exacerbate social divisions and undermine efforts to build inclusive societies based on mutual respect and understanding.
But also, don't forget how we got here. This morning, we can see that the British people have voted to turn the page on 14 years. But don't pretend that there was anything inevitable about that. There's nothing preordained in politics. Election victories don't fall from the sky. They're hard won and hard fought for. And this one could only be won by a changed Labour Party. We have the chance to repair our public services because we changed the party. We have the chance to make work pay because we changed the party. We have the chance to deliver for working people, young people, vulnerable people, the poorest in our society, because we changed the party. Country first, party second isn't a slogan. It's the guiding principle everything we have done and must keep on doing. On the economy, on national security, on protecting our borders. The British people had to look us in the eye and see that we can serve their interests. And that work doesn't stop now. It never stops. The changes we've made are permanent, irreversible, and we must keep going. We ran as a changed Labour Party, and we will govern as a changed Labour Party. I don't promise you it will be easy. Changing a country is not like flicking a switch. It's hard work, patient work, determined work, and we will have to get moving immediately. But even when the going gets tough, and it will, remember, tonight and always, what this is all about. Now, I may have mentioned my parents a few times in this campaign, once or twice. But the sense of security we had, the comfort they took from believing that Britain would always be better for their children, the hope, not high-minded, not idealistic, but a hope that working-class families like mine could build their lives around. It is a hope.
Moreover, the economic implications of immigration policy cannot be overlooked. Proponents of more lenient immigration policies argue that migrants contribute positively to the UK economy through their labour, entrepreneurship and cultural diversity. They contend that welcoming refugees and asylum seekers is not only a humanitarian imperative, but also a strategic investment in the country's long-term prosperity and global competitiveness. Conversely, opponents of liberal immigration policies express concerns about the strain on public services, housing shortages and job competition exacerbated by increased migration. They call for stricter controls to mitigate these challenges and ensure that resources are prioritised for British citizens and legal residents.
That may not burn brightly in Britain at the moment, but we have earned the mandate to relight the fire. That is the purpose of this party and of this government. We said we would end the chaos, and we will. We said we would turn the page, and we have. Today we start the next chapter, begin the work of change, the mission of national renewal, and start to rebuild our country. Thank you.
A rapturous reception for Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, and tomorrow, our new Prime Minister. Celebrating his victory with a crowd of activists at a location in central London, telling them it feels good, enjoy it, but also making a promise to everybody watching, making a promise to the country to, as he said in this campaign, as he said again in the early hours of the 5th of July, return government to the service of the people. And that brings a close to 14 years of Conservative successive governments. And Sir Keir Starmer, smiling there with his wife, Victoria, hopes it will bring an end to an era of genuine political turmoil, whether it's the independence referendum, the Brexit referendum, successive general elections, the pandemic, the coalition. He's promising not just change at the top, but change for the country. But huge challenges ahead, which he's well aware of despite tonight's smiles. But Chris, huge change.
And I was struck as well by his words. There was nothing inevitable. Election victories don't fall from the sky. It's pretty important to reflect on where Labour was 5 years ago to where are we now? 343 seats at 5:10 in the morning, the night after an election, where Labour was in 2019.
It's an extraordinary moment, isn't it, that we've witnessed in just the last few minutes, looking as we are now at the man who will be the UK's Prime Minister by lunchtime, inheriting as he did the Labour leadership after its worst defeat in parliamentary seat terms since 1935 at the last general election, and where we've gone in two successive general elections in the UK from a landslide for the Conservatives to a landslide for the Labour Party.
Looking ahead, the future of immigration policy in the UK remains uncertain. The Labour government faces mounting pressure to reconsider its approach in light of widespread condemnation and legal challenges to deportation and visa cancellation policies. The outcome of these debates will likely shape the trajectory of British politics, influencing electoral outcomes, public opinion and the country's standing in the international community.
Good evening from Nottingham, where Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer have clashed over tax, immigration and welfare in their final head-to-head debate before polling day next Thursday. It was a heated confrontation during which they faced questions from a live audience behind me who challenged them to explain and justify their stance on integrity in politics, the cost of living and Brexit. Well, our political editor, Chris Mason, is here. What stood out for you, Chris?
For me tonight, Rita, it was all about the tone. It was all about the exchanges as opposed to the content. I mean, of course the content matters, but much of that will be familiar to regular viewers over the last 5 weeks or so. But it was the exchanges that defined tonight. It was a more free-flowing debate than we've seen in previous debates in this campaign. There was more anger, there was more passion, there was more jeopardy. Rishi Sunak had nothing to lose tonight, and that defined his approach, I thought. He really went for it. You could feel that. Keir Starmer had everything to lose, and you could sense that too. But he was much more aggressive than he was a few weeks back when the equivalent programme took place on ITV. I think he'd kicked himself a bit after that debate for being insufficiently aggressive, as he might have seen it. Tonight, the scripted put-downs were there from both of them. The things that they anticipate might be clipped up on social media in the coming minutes and hours and circulate with a half-life between now and polling day. They were prepped, they were conscious of what was at stake. It was quite a watch. When this campaign started, it felt like spring. Summer has finally arrived, for now at least, here in Nottingham. And so too, the two men wanting to be Prime Minister the weekend after next. Tonight, the beginning of the sprint finish to polling day. First up, Sue, and you probably won't be surprised by her question.
People are dismayed by the lack of integrity and honesty in politics today. After the recent allegations about political betting, how would you restore trust in politics?
This takes leadership. What I did when one of my team was alleged to have been involved and investigated by the Gambling Commission, they were suspended within minutes.
I was furious to hear about these things. That's why I've dealt with it. But the choice of this election is about, as Sue said, it's about leadership, it's about integrity in politics. And that is a question about doing what you say. You know, Keir Starmer's made this broader point, but the point is he's changed his mind on every major position that he's taken.
Sir Keir jabbed back. What about wider questions of culture in government, he asked.
This isn't just, what's happened this week, last week in the Gambling Commission. We saw Partygate earlier in this Parliament. The Prime Minister himself was convicted and fined for breaking the rules.
In recent months, the United Kingdom has found itself at the epicenter of a heated debate over its immigration policies, particularly under the newly elected Labour government led by Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The controversy has been exacerbated by the government's decision to proceed with a deportation flight and the cancellation of visas for Muslims, sparking widespread condemnation both domestically and internationally. The Labour Party's victory in the recent elections marked a significant political shift from the previous Conservative administration, which had been under intense scrutiny for its handling of immigration issues. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's government, elected on a platform promising to address social inequalities and uphold human rights, now faces its first major challenge with the implementation of controversial immigration policies,
which he brought in and imposed on everybody else.
Next, on to a question about benefits as the exchanges got more punchy, energised, personal.
And I just want to address Beverly's point.
You opposed it when I announced it. You literally opposed it.
If you listen to people in the audience across the country more often, you might not be quite so out of touch. Beverly,
you're going to have higher welfare under you, and that's why you can't deliver tax cuts the way that I can.
the Prime Minister
and people should not surrender to this.
If there's that much wrong with the system, who's the guy in charge of the system over the last 14 years? Why is it so bad?
Well, you want to be in charge, but you've got nothing to say to people about what you would do about it.
We're an island. Why can't we easily close our borders?
If Keir Starmer is your Prime Minister, all those illegal migrants will be out on our streets. And that is the choice for you. Do not surrender our borders to the Labour Party.
Steve, this is complete and utter nonsense.
On the numbers.
Sir Keir said, hang on.
If it were working, why are record numbers still coming under your watch, Prime Minister? How on earth can you say it's working?
Labour want more return agreements, which Rishi Sunak took the mickey out of.
Iran, Syria, Afghanistan. So when Keir Starmer says he's going to return people, is he going to sit down? Are you going to sit down with the Iranian Ayatollahs? Are you going to try and do a deal with the Taliban? It's completely nonsensical what you are saying, right?
Next, the economy, and Rishi Sunak returning to a favourite theme.
I say that the Labour Party's policies will mean all your taxes are going to go up by thousands of pounds. It is in their DNA. Mark my words, your pension, your council tax, your home, your car, you name it, they will tax it.
Well, pensioners are not going to be better off with the Prime Minister who's making promises that he can't keep because they're not funded. That's exactly what Liz Truss got wrong. We cannot... There's one thing that we cannot repeat at this election. Please do not go back to Liz Truss Mark II with this Prime Minister, because the same damage will follow.
The whole point of nights like this is the power lies with the audience in the room, and Robert made the most of it.
Mr Sunak, I think you made a fair job of being Chancellor, but you're a pretty mediocre Prime Minister. Sir Keir, I think that your strings are being pulled by very senior members of the Labour Party. Are you two really the best we've got to be the next Prime Minister of our great country?
My primary job was to deliver that economic stability so I could start cutting your taxes. That is the journey we're now on. So whatever your other frustrations, the choice for you at this election is about the future.
It has to be rooted, if we're going to restore hope, in my view, in returning politics to service. The sense that you come into politics to serve.
At the heart of the current controversy is the UK's decision to enforce a deportation flight policy aimed at asylum seekers, particularly those who have crossed the English Channel from France. Under this policy, individuals deemed to have entered the UK illegally are to be deported to Rwanda, an East African nation, and barred from re-entering the UK. This move has been criticised as draconian and inhumane by human rights organisations and advocacy groups who argue that it violates international refugee law and undermines the UK's obligations to protect vulnerable populations.
And then
Vicky in Oxfordshire, who asks this: will you protect women's right to single-sex spaces from any and all males, regardless of if they hold a GRC, a gender recognition certificate? Rishi Sunak?
Yeah, yes, unequivocally. I get that not all of you will agree with my position, right? But I'm being clear with you. Sex means biological sex. You have to change the Equalities Act to deliver the security of women's spaces and women's services. That's what I believe the right thing for our country is.
Keir Starmer said it was important to protect women's spaces and added,
I will treat them, as I treat all human beings, with dignity and respect. And I'll tell you for why. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, standing in Parliament, making an anti-trans joke in front of the mother of a murdered trans teenager. I will never, ever allow myself to be put into that position.
Brexit was discussed too, as were prospects for young people, and then this flashpoint during their closing statements.
And before you make that choice, think what a Labour government would mean. Can you afford to pay at least £2,000 more in tax?
That is a lie.
Thank you very much.
Not to repeat that lie, and he's just done it.
And this is your closing statement, Keir Starmer.
If you want to end 14 years of chaos and rebuild our country, then that power is in your hands.
And that was it. 5 weeks after this campaign began, its final set-piece moment had finished.
Chris Mason reporting there, and we'll hear from Chris again a little later in the programme. Now, in the BBC's first election debate earlier in the month, we spoke to representatives from the 7 biggest parties in Great Britain, which included the Conservatives and Labour. We asked the other 5 for their reaction to tonight's debate, and here's those who replied.
It was like a third-rate vaudeville act. The big things that should have been mentioned weren't mentioned. Scotland wasn't mentioned once. Brexit wasn't mentioned once, even in response to the question about the trade relationship with Europe. And austerity wasn't mentioned once. And for that reason, I think this election, and I've been in elections for 40 years now, represents the biggest fraud on the people of the UK and on Scotland that I've ever seen.
If you listen to the debate tonight, I think the gentleman in the audience who really hit the nail on the head was the gentleman who said, is this really the best that we've got? And actually what we've seen over the last few weeks is that many people have really made a human connection to Ed Davey, because he's demonstrated that we can make people laugh, we can make them cry, and that he has a real experience, a lifetime of experience.
I think it was the narrowness of the debate that was most shocking. And that's what happens when you leave out all the other parties from the debates, quite frankly. We had a conspiracy of silence from the 2 main parties on some of the key issues like the climate crisis, like the situation in Gaza, like no one standing.
The decision to cancel visas specifically for Muslims has also ignited fierce debate within the UK and beyond. Critics contend that targeting individuals based on their religious affiliation constitutes discrimination and runs counter to principles of religious freedom and equality under the law. The Labour government's justification for this policy remains contentious, with proponents arguing it is necessary to strengthen national security and control immigration flows, while opponents decry it as discriminatory and unjust.
Up for issues like free movement, what we had were two men basically trying to outcompete each other to be as cruel as possible to some of the most vulnerable people like asylum seekers and refugees.
I'm deeply disappointed that the only mention of Wales was by Rishi Sunak, and he was referring to Wales as a political football, which doesn't look to me like a plan, a real plan there, which you'd like to talk about. And of course, there was a gentleman in the audience who asked, are these two the best on offer? And I think there will be many people who will agree with that.
Well, let's get a bit more detail on the claims made during the debate about immigration. BBC Verify's Nick Eardley is in the newsroom in London for us now. Nick.
Thanks, Rita. Yeah, some really heated exchanges and claims on small boats crossings. Here's a reminder of what was said.
The numbers have come down over the past 12 months compared to the 12 months before. But in order to fully solve this problem, you need a deterrent.
There are tens of thousands. 50,000 people have come since Rishi Sunak has been Prime Minister. 50,000 across the Channel.
Okay, let me unpack that and let me show you what's happened in the last few years. There is no doubt when you look at this graphic here that the number of small boats has gone up considerably overall. And when you add this together, Keir Starmer was right to say that 50,000 people have entered the country on small boats since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. But they were both using different calculations about what's happening right now. Because although it's not totally clear from this, it is true to say that small boats crossings are down over the last 12 months. They are down, as was claimed, 30%. However, look at that red line there. There have been a record number of people crossing the Channel on small boats so far in 2024. So that's a bit context on why they could both make those claims that sounded contradictory on small boats. Now, through the whole campaign, both parties have been trading blows on tax and spending. And you probably noticed in his closing statement, the Prime Minister mentioned tax going up £2,000 for working families under Labour. A reminder, we've checked this one before. It risks misleading people, is based on questionable assumptions from political advisers. There is a lot more, Rita, fact-checking of both leaders from BBC Verify online now.
Thank you for that reminder. Thank you, Nick Eardley there. A last word now with Chris Mason. Where does this last debate leave the contenders then, Chris?
It leaves the two camps tonight, Rita, pondering how their men have done and beginning the spin to try and argue that their candidate has won. I'll just give you a little sense of that. Labour saying there was only one person who looked in the room like they were a Prime Minister, and it was Keir Starmer. The Conservatives saying that they're happy with the Prime Minister's...
The backdrop to these contentious policies lies in a complex web of global and domestic factors. The UK, like many European countries, has grappled with waves of migration driven by conflicts in the Middle East, Africa and Asia, as well as economic disparities that push individuals to seek better opportunities abroad. These factors have placed significant strain on the UK's resources and infrastructure, leading to public discontent and political pressure to tighten immigration controls. From a historical perspective, immigration has long been a divisive issue in British politics, reflecting deep-seated anxieties about national identity, cultural integration and economic stability. Successive governments have struggled to strike a balance between welcoming refugees and migrants in need of protection, while addressing concerns about the impact of immigration on public services, job markets and social cohesion.
Performance and point to the fact that Keir Starmer had no answer, they claim, on what he would do with illegal migrants. I think if we take a bit of a step back, this is a format that Rishi Sunak seems more comfortable in than Keir Starmer. His message discipline, Rishi Sunak's, was very noticeable tonight. A repeated phrase about don't surrender, the idea of the country being handed over, if you like, to Labour if Labour win the general election. From Labour's perspective, a definite strategy tonight, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, to be much, much more punchy. They knew that Rishi Sunak was likely to try and throw the kitchen sink at them, and they were trying to argue back in a similar kind of way without, so they hoped, losing an audience who might think it's far too interrupty, it's far too confrontational. What I'm struck by as a final thought is that the opinion polls have barely budged an inch in this campaign as far as the Conservatives and Labour are concerned, with Labour miles ahead. When you watch that debate tonight, it felt much more competitive than those polls might suggest. And a snap poll from YouGov suggested it was 50-50 in terms of the performance of each of them as far as the audience at home was concerned. Nothing yet in this campaign has significantly shifted these polls. Let's see if this, or anything in the final week, can or does.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, as always. Chris Mason there, our political editor.
The Labour government's approach to immigration policy under Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been framed as a departure from the previous administration's more restrictive stance. However, the implementation of deportation flights and visa cancellations has drawn sharp criticism from civil society, opposition parties and international observers who view these measures as regressive and harmful to the UK's reputation as a champion of human rights. In response to mounting criticism, Prime Minister Keir Starmer and his cabinet have defended their policies as necessary measures to restore order and integrity to the UK's immigration system. They argue that deportation flights are a deterrent against illegal crossings and criminal activities facilitated by human trafficking networks. Additionally, they assert that visa cancellations are part of broader efforts to enhance national security and ensure that immigration policies are fair and equitable for all communities. Despite these justifications, calls for a more compassionate and humane approach to immigration continue to resonate across the UK. Civil society organisations, religious leaders and grassroots activists have mobilised to challenge what they perceive as discriminatory practices and advocate for policies that uphold human rights and uphold the UK's obligations under international law. The debate over immigration policy in the UK is also intertwined with broader discussions about social justice, racial equality, and the role of government in protecting vulnerable populations. Critics argue that policies targeting Muslims and other marginalised communities exacerbate social divisions and undermine efforts to build inclusive societies based on mutual respect and understanding. Moreover, the economic implications of immigration policy cannot be overlooked. Proponents of more lenient immigration policies argue that migrants contribute positively to the UK economy through their labour, entrepreneurship and cultural diversity. They contend that welcoming refugees and asylum seekers is not only a humanitarian imperative, but also a strategic investment in the country's long-term prosperity and global competitiveness. Conversely, opponents of liberal immigration policies express concerns about the strain on public services, housing shortages, and job competition exacerbated by increased migration. They call for stricter controls to mitigate these challenges and ensure that resources are prioritised for British citizens and legal residents. Looking ahead, the future of immigration policy in the UK remains uncertain. The Labour government faces mounting pressure to reconsider its approach in light of widespread condemnation and legal challenges to deportation and visa cancellation policies. The outcome of these debates will likely shape the trajectory of British politics, influencing electoral outcomes, public opinion, and the country's standing in the international community. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and for more content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel.